Yes, we are live.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والعاقبة للمتقين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. So the next story is interesting because again, if you guys remember the movie The Message, Al-Risala, when you see Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he's not exactly what he looks like in that movie. Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was born in the same year as Bilal radiallahu anhu. Actually, he was born in the year 580, which makes him 10 years younger than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's described by Imam ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah as being, very dark in his skin, someone that resembled the people of Habasha. So he actually had the traits of the people of Habasha, but he is from a tribe by the name of Banu Kalb. And his mother, her name was Su'da bin Tha'laba. Su'da bin Tha'laba. Now Zayd, obviously his father was Al-Haritha. Zayd radiallahu anhu, his story is very interesting because he wasn't born into slavery, nor were his parents slaves, but rather with Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as he was a young boy, one day he went with his mother to visit their family. And as they were on their way, as they were on the journey, while he was asleep, he was kidnapped by a tribe by the name of Banu Ma'an. So Banu Ma'an kidnapped him, and they took him as a slave, immediately took him to Suq al-Uqab. Al-Uqab is the slave market basically, where they would sell the slaves, and sold him into slavery for 400 dirhams. So in one day, he goes from being, a child that's with his mother, everything is fine, and then now he's taken to the slave market, and he's quickly sold into slavery. Because as we said, that was something that was normal at their time. If you get a chance, if you see someone and you can ambush somebody, then do so. So he's sold into slavery. SubhanAllah, when his mother woke up, he wasn't there anymore. And this huge search, their entire tribe started to search for Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and they couldn't find him. And in fact, his father, Haritha ibn Sharahil, he used to author poetry. He used to constantly author poetry about how sad he was about Zayd. And he used to compare himself to Ya'qub. SubhanAllah, that he's missing him and that he has no happiness in his life. And he even authored a very famous poem that he used to cry and he used to say, بكيت على زيد ولم أدري ما فعل أحي فيرجى أم أتى دونه الأجل فوالله ما أدري وإني لسائل أغالك بعد السهل أم غالك الجبل. He said, I cry for Zayd, not knowing what happened to him. He said, is he alive? Is he to be expected? Or has death come over him? He said, Wallahi, I ask and I do not understand. Was it on flat ground that he died, or was it a mountain that brought him to his end? Meaning I have no idea whether he's alive or whether he's dead, and if he's dead, how he died. He used to constantly cry and chant these lines of poetry. Now the qadr of Allah is so amazing, because that day, when he went to sell his slave, Hakim ibn Hizam radiallahu anhu, was the only man who was ever born in the Kaaba, by the way. Was actually born inside the Kaaba, and he was the nephew of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, would purchase the only slave he's ever purchased in his life. And that happened to be Zayd ibn Haritha. The only slave he's ever purchased in his life. So he purchases Zayd, and he gives him to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha as a gift. And Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, when she married the Prophet ﷺ, she gave Zayd as a gift to the Prophet ﷺ. See the planning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That on that day, that would all happen. On that day, it would happen in that exact order. And so the Prophet ﷺ, used to love Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and they had a beautiful relationship, and Rasulullah ﷺ was known to love him. And later on, Banu Kalb, the family of the mother of Zayd, they saw Zayd with Rasulullah ﷺ years later at Hajj. This is before Islam though. Before Islam. They were coming to do Hajj, Banu Kalb, and they found Zayd ibn Haritha, and they asked who he was, and they confirmed that he's with the Prophet ﷺ. They went home, and they told Zayd's parents, and Zayd's parents were so excited, so happy. So Al-Haritha bin Sharahil, he comes to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he tells the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we are his parents, and he established, that he's his father, and he said, we're here to take our son back, and he thanked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam for treating him well. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, look, he said, the choice will be with Zayd. He said, I'll bring him, and I'll show him to you, and he was with his brother, so the uncle of Zayd. He said, I'll show him to you guys, and we'll let Zayd choose, because Zayd had spent so much time with the Prophet ﷺ. Rasulullah didn't want to lose him, and at the same time the Prophet ﷺ wanted to be just with him. So they called Zayd ibn al-Haritha. And Zayd ibn al-Haritha, as he's sitting there and he recognizes his father and his uncle, you can imagine it's very emotional. And it's very easy for him to cling to his father and remember the good days and things of that sort when he was a child. But instead the Prophet ﷺ says to him, "O Zayd, this is your father and your uncle. They're here to take you. If you want to go with them, then go ahead. Wala haraj, don't worry about it. You're not going to hurt my feelings. It's okay. If this is what you really want, you want to go back with your father, then go." He said, "Or you can choose to stay with me." Zayd did not even hesitate. He said, "Bal uqimu ma'ak." He said, "No, I'll stay with you." And subhanAllah, this was before the Prophet ﷺ was the messenger of Allah, so it's not like this was religious reasoning here. But the way the Prophet ﷺ treated Zayd, he said, "No, I want to stay with you." And Zayd's father, he was so upset. He said, "Ya Zayd, أتختار العبودية على الحرية? Will you choose slavery over freedom? وعلى أبيك وأمك وبلدك وقومك? And over your father, your mother, your country, your people? Are you really going to choose to be a slave over all of that?" And Zayd responded, he said, "إني قد رأيت من هذا الرجل شيئا." He said, "Listen, I have seen something special in this man." He said, وَمَا أَنَا بِالَّذِي أُفَارِقُهُ أَبَدًا. He said, "I am not going to be the one to ever leave him." So Zayd wanted to stay with the Prophet ﷺ. Rasulullah ﷺ wanted to make the father comfortable. So the Prophet ﷺ takes Zayd to the Kaaba. And the Prophet ﷺ, he calls the people and he says, "Ishhadu, everyone bear witness that Zayd is my son. Not only is he free, Zayd is my son." He said, "Warithan wa mawruthan." He will inherit, because this is before the ayah of tabanni, before the ayah which prohibited changing the name. He will inherit everything. He is my son. So Haritha was happy because he saw that his son was in good hands. That the Prophet ﷺ was going to treat him like a son. He's not going to be a slave. And so with that, Zayd remained with the Prophet ﷺ, and from that day he was regarded socially as Zayd ibn Muhammad, Zayd the son of Muhammad, and he was legally Zayd the son of Rasulullah ﷺ. And he stayed with the Prophet ﷺ, he believed in the Prophet ﷺ immediately, he prayed with the Prophet ﷺ, and Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. He grew up in that house, and he was a mu'min, he was a believer from the very start. He made hijrah with the Prophet ﷺ, and he wasn't paired with one of the Ansar. He wasn't paired with the Ansar, rather he was paired with Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He was actually paired with Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And we also see that the Prophet ﷺ married Zayd, actually married Zayd to Zainab bint Jahsh radiallahu ta'ala anha, who was from the most noble lineage. He was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. The most noble lineage, from the most beautiful women, was rich, wealthy. The Prophet ﷺ, as Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, Rasulullah ﷺ was doing away with all of these barriers of class. A man that lived his life as a slave, that was taken as a slave, and was a black man, and it was not traditional in that society to have this taking place. And Rasulullah ﷺ brought him to marry him to the most noble woman of Quraysh. And we know that's something that it didn't work out. The difference was too stark. The difference in their lifestyles was just too much between Zayd and Zainab. And so if you say, well, that means that that the Prophet ﷺ made a mistake or something of that sort? No. Because who the Prophet ﷺ married him to next? Kulthum bint Uqba, who was the maternal sister of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala. So another very noble woman, Kulthum bint Uqba. And so it shows you that Zayd was completely a free man in that society and was able to marry the most noble of women. And of course, his marriage to Ayman radiallahu ta'ala, that's next, and that's a very special story. And Rasulullah ﷺ gave Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu the command of the army, and Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the head of the army in the battle of Mu'tah. And Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, I mean, you're talking about an army of 3,000 versus 200,000 Romans, 200,000 of the Byzantines. And so on that day, Zayd was martyred even in front of his son. He died shaheed on that day, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this is the only one of the male companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that was mentioned in the Quran by name. The only one. Zayd is mentioned by name. So forever, this young man that suffered from racial discrimination, that suffered from class discrimination, that was sold as a slave, every single time a Muslim reads his name, subhanAllah, look at the ajr that goes to this man. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And the Prophet ﷺ used to call him Hibbu Rasulillah, the beloved one of the Prophet ﷺ. And everyone started to call him Hibbu Rasulillah. So his title is the one that the Prophet ﷺ really loved. The Habib of the Prophet ﷺ, the beloved one of the Messenger ﷺ. Who did the Prophet ﷺ marry Zayd to, and where do we find a very special relationship? The next person, Ayman, Baraka bint Tha'laba. Her name is Baraka bint Tha'laba. Rasulullah ﷺ called her Ummi ba'da Ummi, my mother after my mother. And she was an older woman. She was born in approximately the year 557. The year 557. And she was also an Abyssinian slave that was purchased in Suq al-Ukad. And she was purchased by Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib. Who's Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib? You guys need to be awake right now. The father of the Prophet ﷺ. The father of the Prophet ﷺ. So she was purchased as a very young girl by the father of the Prophet ﷺ. And when Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, set out to Asham, and Amina, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, was pregnant with him, Abdullah died in Asham. And she was the one that was nursing, she was helping Amina go through her pregnancy with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And she was the one that would even tell Amina that her husband, Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, passed away. And she was the first person that ever held the Messenger ﷺ. What an honor. She was the first person to take the Prophet ﷺ and hold him. I mean, can you imagine what that was like? And she's the one who narrates the Noor. And subhanAllah, she actually told Abu Lahab, and Abu Lahab was happy. It's amazing. Abu Lahab was happy because she told Abu Lahab about the mu'jiza. Amina shared the miracle that when the Prophet ﷺ was born, a light came from his mother's womb. And they could see the palaces in Asham. They saw the buildings in Asham, the palaces all over the world. They saw it when Rasulullah ﷺ was born. And when she told Abu Lahab that, Abu Lahab was happy because he thought that the Prophet ﷺ was just going to be a great leader of Quraysh and maybe someone that was going to give pride to the Arabs. Little did he know that he would give pride to the Muslims, he'd give pride to Islam, and would be a cause for humiliation for Abu Lahab, his uncle. But she was the one that was there for that incident. And subhanAllah, when Amina passed away at the age of when Rasulullah ﷺ was only 6 years old, Ayman Barak stayed with the Prophet and went with him to the house of Abdul Muttalib. And she continued to be like his mother. She is the closest thing to having to a real mother to the Prophet ﷺ. His entire life she was with him. And even as he got older ﷺ, and he hit the age of 25, and the Prophet ﷺ got married to Khadija radiallahu anha, she refused to get married. The Prophet ﷺ had given her freedom. You don't have to worry about anything. She's free. She's a free woman, but she wanted to watch the Prophet ﷺ. She was the mother to the Prophet ﷺ. So he begged her. He said, go ahead and get married. You need to move on with your life. Go ahead, get married. And she didn't accept until after he married Khadija radiallahu anha, and they both pushed her, just go ahead and get married. It's okay. It's your turn to have your chance. But subhanAllah, and so she married after that, after their insistence, she married Ubayd ibn Zayd. Ubayd ibn Zayd. And they had a son named Ayman. That's why her name is Ayman. They had a son named Ayman al-Habashi. And subhanAllah, we see that she never stopped being a mother to the Prophet ﷺ. She used to watch him. She says that whenever the Prophet ﷺ used to pray, when he used to go to the Kaaba and pray, She said, I used to sneak out of my house and I used to watch him to make sure that no one would hurt him. On the day of the Hijrah, she followed, and subhanAllah, when she came on the day of the Hijrah with her feet swollen and covered in dust in the hardship of the Hijrah, because her husband had already passed away before the Hijrah. Her husband died before the Hijrah, so she was once again alone. And the Prophet ﷺ saw her, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Ummi ba'da Ummi, Ya Ummi, oh my mother after my mother, oh my mother, you have been guaranteed Jannah. So the Prophet ﷺ made her from al-Mubashirin. You have been guaranteed Jannah. And she said that she went on every expedition with the Prophet ﷺ, every battle, and her eyes never left the Prophet ﷺ. She was the first one to go and nurse the Prophet ﷺ, the first one to take care of her. Her eyes would not leave the Prophet ﷺ, even if there were swords around her. Her entire concern, her focus was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And when you're looking at a woman of this caliber, and the Prophet ﷺ gave her the glad tidings of paradise, Rasulullah ﷺ saw her alone. And again, she's a former slave, she's a Habashi woman, she's an Abyssinian woman. And the Prophet ﷺ, he doesn't want her to stay alone. So Rasulullah ﷺ in Medina, Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, who wants to marry a woman of Jannah? That's the way the Prophet ﷺ puts this out. Who wants to marry a woman of Jannah? Zayd ibn Haritha said, I will. Now Zayd ibn Haritha was 25 years younger than Ayman. But he married her. And subhanAllah, we find that they gave birth to Usama ibn Zayd, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, a great man. So Rasulullah ﷺ took care of it, and Zayd ibn Haritha was the one who rushed. And subhanAllah, look at how the man that the Prophet ﷺ raised and took as a son is marrying the woman that raised him. SubhanAllah, the qadr of Allah, the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even as she's at the age of 60 years old, she delivers a child. Okay, so Usama ibn Zayd was born, and she wasn't expected to have children. When you read her seerah, it wasn't expected that a woman of her age would have children. But she had Usama ibn Zayd, and that's also from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Rasulullah used to constantly check on her and would say, Ya Ummi, Anti bi khayr, oh my mother, are you doing well? And she'd respond to the Prophet ﷺ, Ana bi khayr ma dama al-Islam bi khayr. I'm okay as long as Islam is doing well. If Islam is well, I'm well. So she used to always answer the Prophet ﷺ, if Islam is well, then I am well. SubhanAllah, she witnessed a very difficult life because she witnessed the death of her husband, her previous husband. Then she witnessed the death of Ayman al-Habashi, radiallahu anhu, also a Sahabi, who was martyred in the battle of Hunayn. Then she witnessed the death of Zayd ibn Haritha, her husband who was 25 years younger than her, in the battle of Mu'tah. Then she witnessed the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who she raised. Then she witnessed the death of her son Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly tested this woman. She lost everyone that she loved. And subhanAllah, we find that after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr and Omar, they wanted to visit her. So that she didn't, because the Prophet ﷺ used to frequently visit her, so they wanted to keep that sunnah of constantly going and visiting her. So Anas ibn Malik, who by the way is a student of Ayman. Anas is a narrator from Ayman, and Anas is a student of Ayman in deen, in knowledge. Anas says one time Abu Bakr and Omar, they went to visit her, and they sat with her. So she immediately started to bring up all of the memories of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so Abu Bakr, and then she started to cry. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said to her, don't you know that what Allah has given the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam is far better than what we could give him? What's with Allah is better. Don't worry, you shouldn't cry. What's with Allah is better. It's better. And she said, Wallahi, she said, I swear by Allah, I'm not crying just because the Prophet ﷺ died. She said, I'm crying because the revelation ceased to come from the sky. The Quran is no longer being revealed. So Abu Bakr and Omar also started to cry. Now dear brothers and sisters, Ummi ba'da Ummi, my mother after my mother. Think about this for a moment. You want to talk about defeating racism and how the Prophet ﷺ did not see colors? The man that he called his son and the woman he called his mother were both black former slaves. Think about that. You want to talk about the Prophet ﷺ not caring and breaking those barriers, Ummi ba'da Ummi and Zayd ibn Muhammad, both of them. And in fact, when they gave birth to Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Usama, the description of Usama, كان Usama, this is from Abu Dawood, أسود شديد السواد مثل القار. Usama was as black as they had ever seen anyone else. He was the darkest of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. No one was darker than Usama. He is the darkest of the Prophet ﷺ's companions. And the Prophet ﷺ loved him and cared for him the way he cared for Al-Hasan radiallahu anhu. He was born in the same year as Al-Hasan, and the Prophet ﷺ used to play with them all together, and the Prophet ﷺ treated him like a son. You know who Rasulullah ﷺ married him to? Fatima bint Qais, one of the most noble women of the Arabs. The Prophet ﷺ took him to marry her, and she married him, and they had a good marriage. And when the Prophet ﷺ was passing away, let's get to authority. The Prophet ﷺ puts Usama ibn Zayd, a 17-year-old, in charge of the entire Muslim army in those delicate phases. And the Sahaba didn't like that. And there is this whole narration about the Sahaba complaining to Omar radiallahu anhu to talk to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. It's because the older companions were not comfortable with that. But you know what's the amazing thing about this? Not a single one of the companions brought up his race. Not a single one of the companions said, we're not comfortable with a black man leading our entire army. They brought up his age, because the tarbiyah of the Prophet ﷺ had taken effect. They didn't see that anymore. So when they complained, they weren't saying anything bad about him. We're worried because it's a 17-year-old in charge of us. We have Khalid bin Walid, Abu Ubaidah al-Jallah, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. We have some great warriors amongst us, old veterans from Badr. Usama didn't even get to fight until the last two battles of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was too young in the previous ones. He was a kid. No one complained about his color. And subhanAllah, as long as he lived, Usama ibn Zayd was loved by the Sahaba. And we find that Umar ibn Khattab, even he used to give him a higher portion. He used to give him extra money and give him gifts all the time. So one of the sons of Umar ibn Khattab complained to Umar, and he said, you favor Usama. You favor Usama more than your own kids. You give more to Usama than you give to your own kids. And he said to his son, he said, you are not better than him, because the Prophet ﷺ loved his father more than your father, and loved him more than he loved you. And he appointed him as the commander over me. Subhanallah. Think about that level of respect and love. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu is what, 40 years older than Usama ibn Zayd? The love and respect that he has for him, that the Sahaba had for him. To go through some other names. Do you guys remember the third name that I mentioned from the best of Sudan, the best of all black people? What was the third name? Luqman and Bilal. And what was the third one? Mihja'. Mihja'. Does anyone remember who Mihja' is?
The free slave of Omar radiallahu anhu.
What's that? Freed slave of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Umar radiallahu anhu freed Mihja' radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Mihja' was a man that was deeply, deeply involved in ibadah and worship. In fact, some of the ulama, they say when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ, that you should be patient, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with those that call, the poor ones in society, that call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night. Some of the Mufassirin say this was talking about Mihja'. And you want to know what the greatest distinction of Mihja' is? Mihja' was the first shaheed on the day of Badr. Mihja', who was the freed Abyssinian slave of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, was the first shaheed, the first martyr on the day of Badr. He was killed by Amir ibn al-Hadrami, by an Arab. We also find, obviously, Al Yasir, the family of Yasir, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Sumayya bint Khayyat and Ammar. And, the story of them is interesting, because Yasir, the father, Yasir ibn Amir, he's actually from Yemen. Yasir ibn Amir is from Yemen. And he was on a trade route to Mecca. And he didn't get kidnapped and become a slave. But instead, he worked for Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira, a man by the name of Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira. And he fell in love with the slave of Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira, who was Sumayya bint Khayyat. So Sumayya bint Khayyat was also from al-Habasha. And he fell in love with her, and he married her, and they had Ammar ibn Yasir. And obviously this family, because whenever the torture started, Quraysh did not torture those that had noble lineage. They tortured those that were weak, that couldn't defend themselves. The Ibn Mas'uds, the Bilals, the Khabbabs. These people were tortured because they had no one to defend them. They had no parents, no lineage to defend them. So the family of Yasir was strung together, tortured, and they were crying. Rasulullah used to walk by, and Rasulullah used to cry, and he used to say, Sabran ya ala Yasir, be patient, O family of Yasir, maw'idukum al-Jannah. Your appointment, your place is in Jannah. Jannah is waiting for you. Be patient, O family of Yasir. And we know that Suleiman radiallahu ta'ala anha holds the distinction of being the first martyr in Islam. The first shaheeda in Islam. She was killed by Abu Jahl in a very nasty way, but she holds that distinction of being the first martyr of Islam, soon followed by Yasir, the father, radiallahu anhu. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. And Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu lived a very long life. And Rasulullah told Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu that you will be killed by an oppressing army. That there's going to be battles that break out, a fitna, strife that breaks out, and you will be killed by the oppressing army. And Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he died in the battle of Siffin, fighting alongside Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, was tushhid, and he was a martyr on that day as well. The last one that I want to share with you guys, or actually, sorry, not the last one, almost the last one. But this is the longer one, and this is something this is a story that I love. And this is the story of Ubadah ibn Samit. How many of you have heard of Ubadah ibn Samit before? Ubadah ibn Samit was one of the very first Ansar of the Prophet ﷺ, but he wasn't from the Ansar. So he was a freed slave in Medina. Or his family rather, his parents were slaves and they were freed, so he grew up his entire life free. But he lived in Medina, and he was very, very, very dark, and he was praised for being one of the most handsome men of Medina and also the strongest. So he was a bodybuilder. Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the strongest. You know, the companions were pretty big, they were pretty strong people. Ubadah ibn Samit was the most built out of all of them. So he was a big man, very strong. Someone who accompanied the Prophet ﷺ in every battle. Rasulullah ﷺ gave him one of the distinctions of being Kutab al-Wahi, of being those who write revelation. And also he married Haram bint Milhan. Haram bint Milhan was the sister of Sulaim, the mother of Anas ibn Malik. And Rasulullah ﷺ used to visit her frequently. And they were mahram. Okay? Through breastfeeding they were mahram. And the Prophet ﷺ used to visit her, in Ubadah, and he used to take naps even sometimes in their house. And one night the Prophet ﷺ took a nap, or one day the Prophet ﷺ took a nap, and he woke up laughing and smiling, alayhi salatu wasalam. And Haram bint Milhan, she said, Ya Rasulullah, may Allah keep you smiling in this world and in the akhirah. What is it that you saw? So Rasulullah ﷺ said, I saw in my dream a group of my ummah who had crowns on their heads. These are kings of my ummah, and they were spreading Islam by the seas. Now, the Arabs were afraid of water. These are desert Arabs, so they're spreading Islam by sea. And you know what Haram said? She said to Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, ad'u Allah an akuna minhum. Make dua that I'm amongst them. She didn't think to herself, well, I'm a woman, I can't be in them. You know, I missed out on that one. She said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows me to be one of them. Rasulullah said, you are one of them. And you know what happened? She was with Ubadah ibn Samit, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, her husband. She begged to accompany him when the Muslims first set out to Cyprus under the rule of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. They set out to Cyprus, and as soon as they got to Cyprus and she was accompanying her husband, as they were getting out of the ship, she tripped, she fell on her head, and she died. Until today, Haram bint Milhan, the wife of Ubadah ibn Samit, is buried in Cyprus. The only Sahabiya that you can find in Cyprus. SubhanAllah, buried in Cyprus today. Now, Ubadah ibn Samit lived past that, and he continued to he continued to be a great warrior for the sake of Allah. Listen to this story. Listen to this story. You have to pay attention to this story. He was with the army that went to Egypt, okay, to Muslim, under Amr ibn As radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he was the commander. He was the commander of that army. So whenever they got to the area of Babylon, or what's known as the Christian part of Cairo today, Bahira today, it's known as Coptic Cairo. And this is where Al-Muqawqis Al-Muqawqis used to rule. A man by the name of Al-Muqawqis. And Al-Muqawqis, as they reached, as Ubadah ibn Samit and the army reached there, and he met with the Muslim army. And Ubadah ibn Samit stood up in front of the entire Muslim army. You know what Muqawqis said? He said, "Ib'adu anni hadha al-aswad." Take this black man away from me. He said, وَقَدِّمُوا غَيْرَهُ لِيُكَلِّمَنِي. Bring someone else to talk to me. I don't want to talk to this black man in front of me. And you know what they responded? They said, إِنَّ هَذَا أَفْضَلُنَا. This man, the Muslim army responded, that man that you just said that to is the best of us. أَفْضَلُنَا رَأْيًا وَعِلْمًا. He's the best of us in knowledge and reasoning. And they said to Muqawqis, they said, وَإِنَّ الْأَسْوَدَ وَالْأَبْيَضَ عِنْدَنَا سَوَاء. You see how the Muslims matured what the Prophet ﷺ taught these people? That the white and the black to us are exactly the same. We don't care. So Muqawqis, he said, how can you accept him to be the best amongst you? And he said, he should be the least amongst you. Muqawqis continued to insult him. And Muqawqis finally, after seeing that no one was holding back, that no one was going to come forward, that Ubadah was the leader, Muqawqis said, fine, he told him, come, ya Aswad, he said, come, O black man, say what you have to say. But he said, speak to me gently, because your blackness scares me. And he said, and if you speak harshly, then it's going to scare me more and I might be forced to act. Meaning what? I'm intimidated by your blackness. Ubadah wanted to have some fun with this, by the way. Alright? So Ubadah ibn Samit, I'm intimidated by your blackness. So Ubadah ibn Samit, he said, you're intimidated by my blackness? He said, amongst the Sahaba that I left behind are 1,000 men that are as black as me and even blacker. And they're scarier than I am. And he said, if you saw them, you would be scarier. He said, I'm an old man, my youth has left me. But he said, I would not be scared if 100 of you wanted to fight me. So I'm not afraid of you. And he said, and the same is true for all of these companions. SubhanAllah. I've got 1,000 men waiting that are blacker than me. So he had, SubhanAllah, that shows you something about the Muslims. And of course, Muqawqis, when he said that, he was shocked. And of course, the battle took place and the Muslims won that battle. I want to leave you guys with two quick stories. And this is to address, because I know that Imam Khalid will talk about Malcolm's saying that to teach a man to hate himself. I mean, subhanAllah, when someone hates himself, that is a far greater issue than hating anyone else. And we find that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we find a name by the name of Sa'ad al-Aswad. Sa'ad, the black man. And Sa'ad al-Aswad, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he cried. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, is it true that because of my dark complexion, because of my blackness, I will not be able to enter Jannah? Rasulullah ﷺ explained to him, of course not. Prophet ﷺ told him, no, of course not. He said, Jannah is for the one who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who works for his pleasure. He said, listen to what Sa'ad said. Sa'ad said, then how come no one will marry me their daughter? If that's the case, if I'm a Muslim, and I can enter Jannah, how come no one will marry me their daughter? Rasulullah ﷺ took Sa'ad by the hand, and he went to the house of Amr ibn Wahab. And Amr ibn Wahab was an honorable man, one of the most noble Arabs. And Rasulullah ﷺ told him that I am proposing on behalf of Sa'ad al-Aswad for your daughter. And at first he refused, and then the daughter of Sa'ad al-Aswad, the daughter of Amr ibn Wahab said, no, if Rasulullah ﷺ asked, then we have to oblige. So Sa'ad married her. And right when that happened, the battle of Uhud was about to take place. So Sa'ad al-Aswad, on the same day he got married, he had to get ready to go for Uhud. And on the day of the battle of Uhud, Sa'ad al-Aswad was martyred and slain shaheed. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam asked about him. And he asked Amr about him. He asked Ali about Sa'ad. And when he found out that Sa'ad had died and Sa'ad was killed, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam rushed to him. And the Prophet ﷺ took Sa'ad and he put him in his lap. He put his head in his lap. And Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, the tears of the Prophet ﷺ were dropping on the face of Sa'd. Rasulullah ﷺ was crying for him. Then, all of a sudden, the Prophet ﷺ smiled and he looked away. So, Abu Lubaba, he was watching the Prophet ﷺ going through this moment. Abu Lubaba came to him and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I saw you do something I've never seen you do before. He said, you were crying and then all of a sudden you smiled. It was weird. You transitioned from crying to smiling and then you looked away. It was over. And Rasulullah said, I cried because my beloved one passed away. Because I loved Sa'd. He said, and I saw his sacrifice and his love for me, because Sa'd was one of the people that didn't flee the battle, that defended the Prophet ﷺ. He said, but when I started to cry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to me Jibreel alayhi salam, and he said, and I saw him at the Hawd. You know what the Hawd is? The Kawthar. I already saw him at the fountain of Al-Jannah. So he said, so I smiled. SubhanAllah. I mean, can you imagine? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this man who thought that he couldn't even get to Jannah because he was black. And Rasulullah sees him while he's on the battlefield. He sees an image, a vision of Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu already at Al-Hawd. And there's another one, obviously, Julaybib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You know, I did a video about Julaybib, and it's called the ugliest Sahabi. And I use those words in particular. And I put them in quotation marks, but unfortunately people don't know what quotation marks mean. So a lot of people are very angry. How can you call Sahabi ugly? The quotation marks were there for a reason. Because the description of Julaybib was qabih al-wajh, very repulsive, deformed. The meaning of the word Julaybib means deformed. And he was a slave, and he was bullied so harshly that he used to go and hide with the women because of how badly he was bullied and how badly he was oppressed. So he was a man who was deformed, disabled. He was someone that no one treated with respect or love except for the Prophet ﷺ. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he loved Julaybib, and the Prophet ﷺ always used to ask about Julaybib, and the Prophet ﷺ took Julaybib and married him to one of the most beautiful women of the Arabs. And when the Prophet ﷺ went to the parents of that girl, and he asked if the daughter was available, the dad got excited. He said, yeah, of course, Ya Rasulullah, we'd love to have you. He thought it was the Prophet ﷺ asking. Then Rasulullah ﷺ said, no, I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for Julaybib. And he goes, Julaybib? Rasulullah ﷺ said, yeah, Julaybib. He said, I have to talk to my wife about it. He goes to his wife starts to scream, Julaybib, Julaybib. She screams, Wallahi, we will never marry our daughter to Julaybib. And the daughter heard this, and she came. And she said, Rasulullah gives you an order, and you say, Wallahi, I won't do it. Whatever the Prophet chose is best for me. So she married him. And on the day of Uhud, Rasulullah, or actually this was a later battle, it doesn't say which battle it was. Rasulullah asked each tribe, هَلْ تَفْقِدُونَ أَحَدٍ? Are any of you missing anyone? So each tribe responded and said, we're missing this person, or we're not missing this person. هَلْ تَفْقِدُونَ أَحَدٍ? The Prophet ﷺ kept looking around. Are you missing anyone? Are you missing anyone? Are you missing anyone? No one claimed Julaybib. So Rasulullah ﷺ said, لَكِنِّي أَفْقِدُ Julaybib. He said, I'm missing Julaybib. Like he's from me. I'm missing Julaybib. So Rasulullah ﷺ went around looking for him. And the Prophet ﷺ found him dead with 7 of the opposing army around him. Meaning what? Julaybib fought bravely, and he died in that same process. And Rasulullah ﷺ stood over him, and he said, قَاتَلَ سَبْعَةً وَقَتَلُوا. He killed 7, and then they killed him. And Rasulullah ﷺ cried, and he said 3 times, هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُ هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُ هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُ. He is from me, and I am from him. He is from me, I am from him. And the Prophet ﷺ picked up Julaybib, and he took him and he dug his grave. And the Prophet ﷺ got into the grave, took the body of Julaybib, and buried Julaybib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Dear brothers and sisters, I could go on and on. Muhammad ibn Maslama radiallahu anhu, who occupied an authority, was a governor under each and every single Khalifa of Khulafa al-Rashidin. The Prophet ﷺ appointed to leadership, and so did they. I could go into so many different people, but subhanAllah, it's enough to say that these great companions, again they were over 600, were the same ones that were placed in the highest positions and the ones that the Prophet ﷺ loved more than anyone else. The ones who the Prophet ﷺ said, she is my mother and he is my son. And the Prophet ﷺ took to get married to people of different lineage to prove to us, you cannot claim you are not racist if you turn someone away from your door for marriage just because they're of a different race. You can't claim you're not racist if you don't put someone in authority just because of their race. You can't claim you're not racist if you make those evil assumptions that we talked about, that Ustad Rahman talked about in the very beginning. That is a testimony to your kibr and to your racism. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said that racism is a form of shirk. How is racism a form of shirk? They asked him, how is it a form of shirk? He said, because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam described al-kibr, the type of pride that disqualifies a person from entering into paradise. Whoever has in his heart mithqala dharra, even an atom's worth of kibr in his heart, will not enter into Jannah. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, a man loves to have good clothes and good shoes. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, that's not what I'm talking about. Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Allah is beautiful and Allah loves beauty. But kibr is ghamtun nas wa batrul haqq, to belittle people or to deny the truth, to claim a position of God by denying legislation or passing judgment. And he said there is no greater form of ghamtun nas than to tell someone you are that way because you were born that way. Allah created you less. Allah created you less. And we can go through the stories of Sa'id ibn Jubayr. Practically all of the scholars of the Maliki school of thought, Imam al-Qarafi, Imam al-Qayrawani, Nafi', the free slave of Abdullah ibn Omar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, from whom we learn Quran, the sanad of Qalun and Warsh is from Nafi'. We learn Quran from Nafi'. So many different people. Our deen, where a person is not left behind simply on the basis of their race. And dear brothers and sisters, let's try to look at these examples and let's try to see what we can do in our own personal lives. And I hope inshallah ta'ala that this makes us more aware whenever we see these implementations of racism around us. We watch our tongues, we watch our actions to determine whether or not we have this disease inside of us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. And by the way, I want to mention, Africa is a place where Islam has, subhanAllah, has a rich history, particularly Timbuktu. And alhamdulillah, there are brothers here that are actually, they have this exhibit. I'll just hold it up here, inshallah ta'ala. They've been trying to form this exhibit here in Dallas at the Fort Worth Museum, the legacy of Timbuktu. And alhamdulillah, we know that our brothers and sisters, subhanAllah, we look at the situation in Africa, specifically Central Africa right now, where Muslims are being, there's a genocide, practical genocide of Muslims in Central Africa right now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them nusra, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them help. We're so used to people dying. This used to be a place where the greatest books of Islamic history and the greatest books of fiqh and aqidah were written. And so we need to revive that legacy and continue to educate ourselves, inshallah ta'ala. So please do support this project, inshallah. And inshallah ta'ala, the brothers that are here on behalf of it, can you guys raise your hands? So you see the hands, Muslim Shaheed, inshallah. You can talk to the brothers, inshallah ta'ala, about this exhibit. Inshallah ta'ala, with that, I'll hand it over to Imam Khalid Griggs. Salatul Asr is at 4 o'clock, but I think it's 4:15. Good, so we'll start. Should we start right now? Or do you guys want to take a few minutes, a couple of minutes as a break, 3 minutes? I don't think we should take a long break because Asr is coming up. But Imam Khalid is going to, inshallah, let me introduce Imam Khalid, by the way. Imam Khalid is someone, subhanAllah, that's very active in the scope of social justice. And someone that, alhamdulillah, is truly an activist for civil rights and for social justice. And, not just a passionate speaker, but mashallah, just someone that has done so much for our community. He's the Imam in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He just came back from Umrah. And he came and he joined us, alhamdulillah, today from North Carolina. He just got back. So I know he's tired. But again, I've personally heard his class on Malcolm X in Houston a few years ago. It is phenomenal. Please do stay behind, inshallah ta'ala, and benefit. and we'll go, inshallah ta'ala. We'll start. Should we take, what do you think, Brother Adjust? Should we take 2 or 3 minutes? Or just go?
Just keep going.
We'll just go, inshallah, because the Shaykh will only speak for about probably 30 minutes right now, inshallah ta'ala, before Salat al-Asr. So jazakallah khairan to all of you. I appreciate everyone attending online on site. Please stay put, inshallah ta'ala, and I'll hand it over to Imam Khalid. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
Takbir.
Allahu Akbar.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم. Brothers and sisters, you have been sitting for a very long time today. Those who are watching online have the benefit of getting up and getting refreshments and refreshing themselves. And you have been restricted to the breaks, the natural breaks for Salah, this kind of thing. So I don't want you to try to endure more than your bottom can take. So I'll try to compress some of the comments that I intend to make, and yet try to do justice to one of the most transformative figures of the 20th century, whether we're talking about Muslims or non-Muslims. And I think that it's indeed worth noting that ILF has made this connection between Islam, and I will start getting loud in a few minutes, so we might not want to have it. I increase the volume as I go on, so we don't want it too close here at the beginning. But I think that it's very important that we make this connection between the history of Muslims and the past, as we have learned about during the course of the morning and afternoon, but also look at someone from amongst us. And when I say from amongst us, I'm not talking about someone that you and I have walked with or may have even seen in our lifetimes, but someone whose impact over 50 years after his assassination on February the 21st, 1965, that you and I are sitting here today trying to understand who was this iconic figure. Why is it that we're still talking about someone who was not a scholar of Islam? That he was not someone who had gone to Islamic universities or had specific training. As a matter of fact, many Muslims say that Malcolm X al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz was only within the orthodox parameters of Islam for 11 months of his life. For just 11 months, but 50 years after his assassination, we're here today. And so many researchers and historians have tried to explore this last year of his life and what was it about this man that made his dynamism transcend time and transcend different communities. And so I want to have full disclosure at the beginning. And I want to let you know that I'm not a dispassionate historian about Malcolm. That I'm not someone who can just talk about Malcolm in a kind of scientific and antiseptic kind of way, because he's meant so much to me that I would dare say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used Malcolm to help bring me into Islam. And so at the very beginning, as I give this full disclosure, I have to talk about my favorite aunt,
that I love so dearly, who is no longer with us, my Aunt Lou, who lived in the Bronx in New York. And during the summers, I used to go to New York and spend time every summer with my favorite Aunt Lou. And my Aunt Lou had two passions. And as a young kid from elementary school, I began to listen to my Aunt Lou's passion, especially after 1963 when the New York Mets were formed. And my Aunt Lou embraced the New York Mets as one of her life's passions. But she also had this passion for this man that I knew nothing about by the name of Malcolm X. And so I credit my Aunt Lou with planting the seed about this man who would make so tremendous impact on our society from the middle of the 20th century until the time that he was martyred. I want to, in this full disclosure, say that I never met Malcolm personally. Never did. As a matter of fact, I was 12 or 13 years old when he was martyred. But I did have the honor and the privilege of meeting his wife, Betty Shabazz. I had the honor and privilege of having lunch with her and having conversations with her. And before she was killed in this horrible fire, she had actually said that, yes, you know, I've heard you on the radio talking about my husband. I've read some things that you've written about my husband, and I was there with another dear friend by the name of Amir al-Islam, and she said that if you guys choose to write something, then I will do a forward. I would put whatever you want into this particular work. I've had the opportunity to be with a couple of Malcolm's daughters and shared platforms with them. I've had the opportunity in the late 1980s and the early 1990s to host conferences about Malcolm. But it was at a time in the late 1980s when the Muslims, African American and other Muslims in this country, were debating whether or not Malcolm died as a Muslim, whether or not this martyr for Islam was actually a Muslim. So there was this conversation and this dialogue that was so unexpected. How can someone look at the life of a man, of a Muslim like Malcolm, and question whether or not he was even Muslim? So if there's anyone in this audience who has this, we want to shatter, we want to disabuse you of this notion. We want to spend a few moments talking about the life of Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, not wallowing in the period of his pre-Islam. But I think it's essential to understand the social and historical context in which Malcolm X lived. Now there's so many things that you can just go and pick up. You can go on the internet and check Google. If you go to Wikipedia, just Google in Malcolm and go to Wikipedia. There's so many things that you can find out about his life that it's not necessary for me to dwell on those things, but I will start by talking about how Malcolm was someone who grew up in an era in America that we should thank Allah every day that we are not living in that era in which he was born. Because I'm talking about a time from the 1890s until the 1920s when one of the favorite pastimes, especially of Southern white races, was lynching African American black men. And black people were being accused of being the reason why there were problems in America and why the economy was not what it had been in the past for white people. And so one of the pastimes was for extrajudicial lynchings, to grab someone off the street and hang them up by a tree and just leave their bodies and not just have it as a lynching, but just have it as a form of entertainment. So bring your family out, make it a picnic, make it an event. Let's lynch let's shoot, let's burn this black man and have it as a social event. And you can look in some of the historical journals, look in the books, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm not making up anything. This is a period in the United States. And Malcolm X was born in May 19th, 1925. He was born to a man by the name of Earl Little. And Earl Little was from the South, from Reynolds, Georgia. Malcolm's mother was a woman by the name, her birth certificate or her birth name was Louisa, but we now know her as Louise, and now we'll say Little. And Louise was from Grenada. And being from Grenada, she had an African-American mother, but her father was the rapist of her mother. And so she was the product of a rape. She was a product of the violation of her body by a racist white person in Grenada. And so Malcolm's father was a very dark-skinned person. And his mother was very light-skinned. And at that time, coming from the Caribbean, that having that complexion meant that there were certain kinds of affinities, that you get certain benefits from just having this light skin color. And it was, as we look back on it, it seems like it was a little bit more, it was a deeper kind of situation in the Caribbean than it was in the United States, even though we had a similar kind of situation. And so we find Malcolm's parents getting married and meeting in Montreal, Canada. You see, Malcolm's father was a product of an environment in the South, in Reynolds, Georgia, as I talked about lynchings and all these kinds of things. So he was a part of a migration out of the South, which was the largest migration of people, citizens of this country, in the history of this country. It was the migration of black people from the South into the North, into the Midwest, and out on the West Coast. So Malcolm's father was one of those people who said, because 3 of his brothers, Earl Little's brothers, were killed by white racists, Earl Little said, no, I can't stay here. So he and thousands, if not millions of other African-American people left the South and went into these areas. Earl Little ended up in Montreal, Canada, where he married Malcolm's mother, Louise. Earl Little was a member of an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, that was formed by Marcus Mosiah Garvey. This was a kind of pride, self-pride. The Sheikh Omar has talked about how this kind of racist oppression, the kind of psychological damage that it does to not just individuals who are victimized by vigilantes, but it does it to the entire group of people who are suffering this kind of abuse. And so we find that this Universal Negro Improvement Association was this uplift organization that actually became the largest membership organization of African people ever. This is an organization that was started by someone, Marcus Garvey from Jamaica, who ended up in London. And he ended up working at the magazine office of an Egyptian Sudanese Muslim by the name of Dus Muhammad Ali. Now, Dus Muhammad Ali was editing a journal called the African Times and Orient Review. And it was being sent all around the African diaspora. And it was something that people, English-speaking people, looked forward to getting because it had articles from people who were trying to uplift the minds and the conditions of African people. And so Marcus Garvey came back to the United States and he formed his base in New York City. And we find that the father and the mother of Malcolm X were a part of this organization called UNIA. We find that this father was one who would instill in his children, Malcolm included, a sense of pride about who they were. You can see the influence of this Muslim, Dus Muhammad Ali, in this early stage of this organization when it had as its anthem, one God, one aim, one destiny. We find that this organization also, even though there were so many Muslims who had come from the Muslim world, who had immigrated to the United States at the turn of the 20th century, for the most part, there was almost absolutely no dawah, there was no outreach to people of African descent in this country, or hardly to anyone else. That the Muslim immigrant community at the turn of the 20th century was doing like any immigrant community would do. They were trying to just learn the land, to try to learn the language, to just preserve traditions, consolidate their incomes and these kinds of things. But this didn't serve well for the teaching and the reach out and the invitation of this oppressed population in the country at this time. And so stay with me as I try to tie these things together about Marcus Garvey. Don't let me lose you as I go. And so we find in this country that Malcolm, and I'll jump ahead to make a point because I may forget to mention it later, that during the turn of the century in the teens, the 19-teens and the 1920s, the only group of people who were Muslims, for the most part, who were reaching out to African American people were a heterodox group out of India, as you are familiar with, called the Ahmadiyas. And one of the friends, the partners in crime of Malcolm, by the name of, if you saw the 1992 Spike Lee film called X, they had in this film one of his partners in crime that they called Shorty. His name was Malcolm Jarvis. And in 2001, Malcolm Jarvis did this interview and he said that there were Ahmadiyya Muslims. And he gave a name that I can't recall right now, but it was of an Indian Ahmadiyya, that he said that this Ahmadiyya just consistently talked to me and Malcolm. He said he talked to us all the time. As a matter of fact, when we ended up going to prison, he still was coming to prison to try to recruit us into this particular brand of Islam. Brothers and sisters, to move this narrative just a little bit into the future, we find that at the turn of the century there was another phenomena going on, similar to this phenomena of the UNIA, and this was a phenomena that was with people of African descent in this country themselves, and this was trying to reattach an Islamic root that had been interrupted with African people through the transatlantic slave trade. As Sheikh Omar had talked about, and we have this wonderful exhibit that is coming here to Dallas, that we have information about the Muslim empires of Timbuktu and Mali and Songhai and across West Africa, into East Africa, and Central Africa. We had at one time these glorious empires, and then as these empires weakened, now stay with me, I've jumped across the Atlantic on you now. Stay with me just for a second. But as these empires weakened, at the same time we find Europe starting its colonial adventures and starting a transatlantic slave trade that would bring 1 out of every 3rd African brought to this country as a Muslim. And so we find that this disconnect of many people of African descent between what was their ancestral religion, what was their practice, who were your ancestors, and looking at all of the history of the Muslims who maintained their Islam throughout the history of slavery in this country, that there was a movement at the turn of the 20th century of African people in this country to now want to try to reconnect, as they were taught more about this Islamic group, to reconnect with Islam. And so now we have a lot of things going, a lot of activity that's shaking up, particularly on the east coast of the east coast of the United States. We have all of this activity now that's kind of socially and religiously shaking up the African people in the United States. So going to move just a little bit forward. So we find that Malcolm's father, who was a very fiery, electrifying, charismatic speaker, was going around because of his speeches, because of his lectures. His family was suffering immensely from the racists who did not want to hear him talking about the teachings of Marcus Garvey. And we find, as a result of his father having to move so many times, that there was this kind of social instability from just running from one place to another, trying to just stay ahead with those who were trying to kill the father. There has been so much written about Malcolm's father being a Baptist preacher. But I have to say, with the people in the family that I've spoken with, the research that's come out recently, it seems that Malcolm's father was not actually a preacher, that he was preaching in a lot of black church pulpits about Marcus Garvey, and Malcolm, as a child, being with him so much and seeing his father in the pulpit, may have mistakenly thought that he was actually a preacher when he was just a lay leader who was committed to this UNIA. Let me say something real quickly about, and tie these things together, and something very quickly about the early religious training of Malcolm. Malcolm's mother was the primary religious educator for the family. And Malcolm said later, and his other siblings talked about how his mother had a very eclectic view of religion, meaning that she would take a little bit from the Seventh-day Adventists, she would take a little bit from the Jehovah's Witnesses, she would draw her dietary codes of not eating pork and being very strict and impacting this in Malcolm's mind at a very early age. But she was someone who did not teach her children that Isa alayhi salam was the son of Allah, astaghfirullah. So Malcolm said that in growing up and his mother teaching him his early religion, that he never had the problem of this kind of association of partners with Allah by saying that Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam was Allah's son. And so we find Malcolm developing, because of this kind of loose association about religion, he developed an attitude of being against anything or any religion that was illogical. If it didn't make sense to Malcolm, he said from a young age, he just had to discard it. So we have these influences on the early life of Malcolm within the UNIA, within that could not be ignored, even though he was a young person. This growing movement of African Americans to try to reconnect their roots with a man by the name of Timothy Drew, who in history became known as Noble Drew Ali, and the Moorish Science Temple of America. And one other group that I'll mention at this point was the Nation of Islam, that was not formed until 1930 in Detroit, Michigan, by a man by the name of Fard Muhammad. So, Malcolm's father ends up moving to Michigan. And then from there, and Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925. And then he goes to Michigan. And then he's in Lansing. And then he's in East Lansing. And at the age of 6, Malcolm's father was brutally murdered. Malcolm and his siblings say that he was murdered by a group of white racists that called themselves the Black Legions. That they had firebombed Malcolm's family home, and that the father was eventually killed, that his head was split open in the back by an axe or something, some kind of sharp trauma into the head. And his body was placed on trolley tracks and run over by the trolley. And the mother, Louise, had 2 insurance policies. One of the policies paid $18 a month if there was an accidental death to her husband. The larger, more substantial policy, the insurance company refused to pay because they said that this man, Earl Little, had hit himself in the back of his head, had bruised himself all over his body, had dragged himself to the trolley tracks, and committed suicide. And so the financial stress that was put on this family proved to be too much for Louise. And as a result, about 2 years after the death, 2.5 to 3 years after the death of her husband, she lost her mind, that she had a nervous breakdown. And for the next 24.5 years, Louise Little sat in either the Kalamazoo State Mental Hospital or in some other mental health facility for the next 24.5 years until the family was able to rally to get her out of this mental hospital. Now, what time do we stop here?
Yeah, sure.
I'll start at 4:15.
4:15, okay. I'll just make one more comment and we will break, inshallah. And that is that when Louise Little was placed in the mental hospital, the children were parceled out to various either reform schools, detention centers, or foster homes. And Malcolm was among those who was parceled out. And Malcolm was a very bright young man. And there's this notion about Malcolm that before he went to prison that he was some kind of illiterate who couldn't read and write, and he found literacy in prison, and this is very, very far from the reality. When Malcolm was in the 7th grade, as you all know, that he was elected the president of his class, and he was the only black student in the class, almost in the whole school. Malcolm was an overachiever in the classroom. But it was not until he told one of his teachers, one of his male teachers, that he wanted, when he was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said that I want to be a lawyer. And the teacher responded to this 7th grader that, Malcolm, you need to be realistic, that you're a nigger. And a lawyer is no profession for a nigger. You just need to just be satisfied with who you are. Why don't you be a carpenter? Why don't you find some electrical work or do something with your hands? You're really good with your hands, Malcolm. So forget about using your mind to be able to support yourself and your family. Just use your hands. Go build a house, tree house, anything. And so at this kind of put down, at this young age in the 7th grade, Malcolm chose the route of just dropping completely out of school. So I'll end at this particular point, inshallah. We'll pick up after Salah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we'll take a break now. Jazakallah khair, Imam Khalid. We'll take a break, inshallah ta'ala. We'll take a 10-minute break, inshallah. We'll resume at 4:25. Is that possible? Kind of, sort of? Oh, okay. So between 4:25, 4:30, inshallah ta'ala, by 4:30. I know that we have a lot of people joining, and I know that you all are tired. I just want to make something very, very clear. Watching the movie about Malcolm X is not